Joining us on the line is Glenn Beck, CEO of The Blaze, host of Glenn Radio, Glenn TV, Glenn Beck podcast. Basically, anything named after Glenn Beck is probably hosted by Glenn Beck is a pretty good bet. He also has a brand new book out. It is called Arguing with Socialists. Well, congratulations, Glenn. You won the argument. Bernie dropped out today.
Thank you.
So good timing on that. What do you make of the geriatric communist leaving the race?
I'm sending him a copy of the book. He's got plenty of time to read it now. It's amazing to me how the extreme aged are doing so well in the Democratic Party. I don't think Biden is going to end up being the guy, because I think he's fading really, really fast. And I think there's going to be somebody that goes, come on, guys. I mean, listen to him. He doesn't even know where he's at now. We can't have him run for president.
It's possible they could have a Zoom convention, and it's possible that he, just like my grandparents, just can't Skype in. He's just trying to Zoom in, and he's like hitting the button, and suddenly Joe Biden can't get into the teleconvention. The only person who can get in is like Gavin Newsom. Okay, Gavin, I guess you're the presidential candidate. So, Bernie, what led to Bernie's downfall here? Because you and I had discussed weeks ago the sort of going notion that after Bernie had tied in Iowa, won in New Hampshire, won in Nevada, that he was the guy going forward. And then the Democratic Party really consolidated around Biden after South Carolina, where he won a sweeping victory. So what happened here? Because Bernie, I had been told by Bernie, had created a historic movement and then lost to a person who is not actually sentient. So what exactly happened here?
Mm-hmm. I think what happened was they saw themselves losing horribly with an avowed socialist, a guy who was defending the Castros and Russia and everything else, and they realized we cannot go forward with this guy or it will be a historic loss. And they just all kind of rallied the wagons and circled the wagons around Biden. I've never seen anything in American politics like it. It was extraordinary what they did to make sure that he was not the candidate.
It was pretty incredible. Now, the question going forward is whether the Democratic Party is still Bernie's party, meaning that Biden was sort of the last gasp. It can't be this geriatric, horrifying, nasty communist. It's got, maybe we put a nicer face on it next time around. It's somebody who's less off-putting, but similarly wild left. Elizabeth Warren tried that for a little while, and then it turned out that she flamed out when she tried to actually put meat on the bones of socialism. As it turns out, socialism only can be supported via the bones. But do you think that the future of the Democratic Party looks less like Biden and more like Bernie?
Yes, not physically like Bernie. I think it looks more like AOC. I think you're going to see, especially, I mean, Ben, when I was writing the book, I thought we were going to be talking about the primaries and, the difference between the free market and socialism. Well, we're talking about coronavirus, but what they're still talking about in Washington is a free market or socialism. All of the things that Bernie had on his dream list is being put on the dream list of all of these bailouts. What the Fed is doing is the modern monetary theory. So we're moving in this direction. And I think Bernie Sanders was more like Barry Goldwater. I think you're going to see the loss of Bernie Sanders now, but it was imprinted on the hearts of a lot of people that grew up with their first memory being September 11th, when the markets crashed and everybody was freaking out. Then the next big crisis was 08, and the banks crashed and their parents lost all their money. And now this one. This looks, if you were born around the turn of the century, this looks like a very unstable system that just destroys people, and the people up at the top just get more power and more money. That's who we have to reach out to and say, look, every bit of your experience is not what the free market really is. This is not the free market, and it hasn't been like this until we really started tinkering with everything.
Yeah, Glenn, this is what scares me so much about what's going on currently is, aside from the threat of the pandemic itself and how many people are going to die, what scares me long-term for the politics of the United States is that, I had Andrew Yang on my Sunday special, and very nice guy, but we were talking universal basic income. And his basic thesis is that technology was going to put millions and millions of people out of work, and then you needed to support them via the government. And I said, well, there's not a lot of evidence of that. We got a 3.5% unemployment rate, more jobs open than candidates looking for the jobs. Well, one way that you can achieve the sort of universal basic income idea pretty quickly is to forcibly throw 30 million people out of work over the course of 1 month by completely shutting down the American economy and then turning around and blaming capitalism. This was a government-induced economic coma. And I'm not saying that it wasn't necessary. It may very well turn out to be that it was necessary in the time that it was. But I think a lot of people are going to take away from that. Well, if my job went away and then doesn't come back, because most of the jobs that have been going away are blue-collar, mid to low-pay jobs, that what choice do I have other than to go to the government and ask them to create some sort of wealth tax on the wealthy and completely destroy the foundations of capitalism on the back of a government-induced economic disaster?
I have to tell you, one of the chapters in the book, Ben, is about technology, a massive disruption of jobs, and technology getting in bed with the government and the government using universal basic income and also modern monetary theory. While I didn't say it was coronavirus, that's what's just happened. And it is a freight train that is coming down at us. And if we are not informed, if we don't know what modern monetary theory is, if we don't know what universal basic income really is, it's going to be put in just like FDR did all kinds of stuff. When people are freaking out and they're hungry, you can do anything. But the long-term effects of this are disastrous for the free market.
Yeah, Glenn, I could see the aftermath of the pandemic going a couple of ways. One could be that people are so fed up with being cooped in their houses that the glories of socialism have brought along with them, us actually living in basically army barracks or restricted to quarters. And so at the end of this, we're like, okay, no socialism. And also I want to leave my house. So if we were going to get all of the, government largesse and it was going to be connected with also you can never leave your house again and you're locked in here with your three children, then perhaps at the end of this, there's actually a libertarian moment where we all go, okay, I need the government to leave me the hell alone now. Or you could conversely see what you're talking about, particularly if there's a long lasting recession out of this. Which way do you think that's going to go?
Gosh, Ben, I would love to tell you that I think it's going to go a happy way. But I could see it. Let me give you a case for both. I could see it going when we are finally let out that the American spirit is just on fire and we produce more than we've produced in a very long time. But I also think that there's a lot of people, including the media, that want this president to fail and their love of country is far less than their hatred for Donald Trump. And it's almost as if they're rooting for this to be going on and misery to be, stacked up upon misery, that I could see us going the opposite direction as well, because I think there are those people that want this coronavirus to be successful at the expense of the country being successful.
I think there are a lot of people who would like to see the impact of the coronavirus, particularly in the economic sphere, magnified. I don't think anybody wants to see lots of people die, but I think that if what people get out of this is a giant growth of government, I think a lot of people will be happy with that growth of government. When it comes to the actual pandemic, Glenn, how do we get out of this? Because right now the data are just not sufficient. We don't know anything, and it's driving me up a wall because at the same time we're being told trust the experts are not providing us any level of transparency into how they're thinking about this sort of stuff. Like when the White House released its numbers, when they said 100,000 to 240,000 people are going to die, they didn't give us a time period. They didn't give us the factorial inputs. And then the studies just keep being reduced. So now we have today the IMHE model, which has reduced the number of expected deaths down over the course of 5 days from 93,000 all the way down to 60,000. So what exactly changed? They won't really say because they can't really say. Instead, they're just sort of saying, well, it looks like staying at home is working. At the same time, I don't know that anyone in the government has actually set up a plan for us getting back to work. So what do you think this looks like and how do we get out of it?
It's funny, Ben, because I was just talking about this on my show today, that the government has not given us a tripwire. From the very beginning, I've been asking, what is the tripwire? What are the factors that are saying that we need to close schools, that we need to close businesses, that we have to close? What are those tripwires? And I couldn't get anyone in Washington to tell me what they are. Well, I find myself in exactly the same place. Somebody's making a decision on whether we open this country or not. Can you tell us what it is? Because the way I think this should have been done is the tripwires. They should have said, look, if we have this kind of spread with these kinds of numbers and the beds in the hospital are at this rate, we think that schools should close. We think that, and then you should have to volunteer to do those in your own community, because in my community, my hospital rates are not there. The different things that are happening in New York are not happening here. But at least tell me how you're making these decisions, and no one is telling us what is the president looking for to happen so we can get out. It's like a prison sentence that could end at any time or could last forever. That would be called cruel and unusual punishment.
It is pretty wild, especially because, again, some of the estimates that are being put forward when Dr. Fauci said, well, we have to wait until we have no deaths. And I just thought to myself, well, there's no, this is a country of 330 million people. What are you talking about right now? There's not going to come a point where there are no deaths from any particular cause. I mean, if I said to you, we have to shut down the country until all deaths from skydiving stop, you couldn't actually do that, because presumably there will still be deaths from skydiving in a country of 330 million people. Like the attempt to shut down conversation about this very thing. Like when Trump says, I'd love to open it up by Easter. And then people are like, well, that's probably not right. Instead of then people just saying, well, maybe the time period isn't right, but that's a conversation we should start to have. It was, how could he even discuss this at this time? Does he just want the Dow Jones Industrial Average to rise at the expense of human life? And I keep thinking to myself, like, you have not even established at this point that your policies over the course of a year until a vaccine is developed are actually going to save human life, other than just avoiding the overruns at the hospital. So let's say we avoid the overruns at the hospitals, which, by the way, it looks like we are going to fairly successfully do. There may be some serious issues in New York hospitals, but Cuomo said yesterday that he thinks that the ventilators will be sufficient. We know that the hospital beds are already sufficient over there. So let's say that we do that. Now the question becomes, over the course of the next year, till when a vaccine is developed, have you actually lowered the amount of death by keeping us all locked up? Or have you just, created a hardline position for which there is no counterfactual? Because if you say we all have to stay at home and we've saved lives, and I say, well, we won't have saved lives if we do that, like, there's no way to live in that counter universe. Whatever is the policy that gets implemented. And it's very easy to argue that if we had done it the other way, things would have been better or worse.
I talked to Stephen Moore on Friday, and he had just gotten out of a meeting at the White House on this very subject of how are we going to open this up? When are we going to open this up? He came out pretty depressed, quite honestly. But he came out and he said to me that, the point he was trying to make was, look, you're going to kill, for every point of unemployment that you raise, the average is about 10,000 people die. So if we're at 30% unemployment, you're killing many more people than would have died with coronavirus. There comes this balance where if people aren't working, depression, suicide, battery, alcoholism, all of this stuff goes through the roof. And this is what the president was saying when he said the cure can't be worse than the virus. And I don't know where that is, but nobody's even allowed to talk about it. You're exactly right. And it is all because of this irrational hatred for Donald Trump and politics.
Yeah, there is this tendency that whenever there's a crisis, you've got to maximize that as much as possible. And people in the media, most of whom are retaining their jobs and able to work from home, there does seem to be a vast disconnect between the Twitter world, where people are hanging out and talking politics in their little echo chambers, and Main Street America, where people are losing their jobs, where they're having their live streams destroyed. I think that we on the right, we tend to talk about, if the economy goes down, then people are going to commit suicide and people are going to engage and they're going to die deaths of despair and all of this. But it's not just that. I mean, the lives are ruined without people dying. And if somebody has invested their life savings to start a restaurant, and then you shut them down for a year without explaining to them why you're shutting them down or how they hope to come out of it, and then you expect everybody in America to basically give up the basic freedom to walk outside, which is something that is now happening, right? People are now being pulled over on the street. There's that case in Pennsylvania, the woman being pulled over for the great sin of driving in her car with her just by herself. There comes a point where I thought freedom was actually one of the things at issue here, and I'm willing to suspend the freedoms for a few weeks here while you get the data, but you got to tell me when the data is coming in, and you got to tell me how you expect to get that data in the first place. It's driving me up an absolute wall because I've asked the same people that you've asked, Glenn. I mean, I've been talking to 2-3 doctors a day on this stuff. You're getting different estimates from everybody. Nobody is even willing to lay out a hard and fast path for how to do this. Like, Scott Gottlieb, who I think does a good job in trying to lay this stuff out. Even he has been very vague about what do you expect in terms of testing and contact tracing? Like, how do you expect that to happen over the course of the next, let's say, 5 months till we get to September? So when there's a second wave, it's sufficient to actually finish this stuff. Like, no one's being practical. It's all sloganeering.
I'm really concerned that this is going to be handled so poorly, and there's going to be such devastation that when it does come back in the fall, you're going to have a real problem getting people back into the houses. You're going to ask me to shut down a second time? Are you crazy? I talked to people on the radio today that I asked people, who's filing for business loans? And all these people calling in, they all said what a nightmare it was, how they couldn't, how the banks were trying, but they didn't know what any of the rules were, how, they were applying, but they would have no idea when that money would even come to them. These people are people who are dreamers, who worked their whole lives to be able to save up, did not have enough money to, maybe they could keep their business open for some sort of a crisis for 45 days, but that's the limit. 45 days. They still have to meet all of their bills. They're seeing the banks being bailed out immediately. They get their money immediately. These small businesses don't. And they only get $355 billion. Look, I don't know about you, Ben, but I didn't voluntarily close anything down. My business is closed and shuttered, and nobody's working in my office because the government told me not to do that. And maybe I would have done it on my own. Maybe I wouldn't have. But when the government tells me you have to do it, and then I have to feel all the pain, the big guys get bailed out. You told me, now I've lost my family business. I've lost all my dreams, everything I worked hard for, and you're responsible? I think there is real opportunity for unrest to happen if Donald Trump doesn't recognize the little person.
Yeah, but President Trump, I will say the one thing that I think has been keeping a lid on this, at least from the right, has been the fact that Trump is constantly going out there and saying things like, I want to get the economy back open. Because if I had the mildest suspicion that the president of the United States was actually using this as a cover to promote giant government programs, I'd be a lot hotter right now. Right? The fact that Donald Trump obviously does not want to be in this situation is definitely a help. If Barack Obama were president right now and he were saying, yeah, we need to shut down. And also, we could use a few $100 million and $100 billion for climate change here and maybe some job programs, some government job programs there. I would start thinking to myself, wait a second, the never let a good crisis go to waste mentality. How bad is this thing actually? Like, I think that Trump's sort of instinctive love for American business is actually making me a little bit more easy about the idea that at least they're trying, right? At least they want to get back there. But again, I want to see some information on how we get back there because I'm not seeing any information whatsoever on how we get to the point of contact.
I have to tell you, I am 100%. I can't believe you said this because today I was thinking to myself, if this were Barack Obama, I don't think I would be saying the same thing because I wouldn't trust that Barack Obama wanted to open small business back up again, that he wasn't trying to get something where Donald Trump, the one thing I can say about Donald Trump that we all know is true is he's a capitalist. There is no way he wants all this stuff to burn down to the ground. It's bad. And he knows it. He believes in the free market, where Barack Obama did not believe in the free market. He believed that you didn't build this. Government built it. Donald Trump knows he's built it with his own hands and his own sweat, and he understands that in America. And I think you're right. Him being president and him being a capitalist, a very well-known capitalist, I don't think I would take it from George W. Bush either. It's not just Barack Obama. I don't think I would have taken it from George W. Bush. I know Donald Trump at his core is a hardcore capitalist that does not want this shut down a day longer.
So, Glenn, looking forward to the 2020 election, obviously President Trump has not gotten the sort of political bounce you've seen from other Western leaders. And that's predictable, number one, because the media are the media. But number two, because President Trump is not exactly a Queen Elizabeth type. He's not getting on TV and telling us stiff upper lip gang and let's all hold it together. How do you think that 2020 plays out? You've got President Trump, who is volatile by temperament, and then you have Joe Biden, who is presumably senile. So I will say, I think the debates are basically going to be the Swedish Chef versus Chewbacca. And they're not going to be conducted in English. They're just going to be conducted in animalistic grunts and odd languages and dithering off into nowhere. What do you think how do you think this all impacts 2020?
I first of all, I don't think it's going to be Joe Biden. I really don't. I don't know how they're going to get out of it, but I don't think it's going to be Joe Biden. I think it's going to be Cuomo. I really do. I hope I'm wrong, because Biden will be so easy to beat. But I think that there is something that is happening that the media is not paying attention to at all. They always make things worse. And that is that they have so discredited themselves with China, the coronavirus, hydroxychloroquine. All of this stuff is just mounting up. And Donald Trump, if you watch him at 5 o'clock, which I've been watching him every day at 5 o'clock, you see a side of him that you don't see in the media, you don't see elsewhere, and that is him surrounded by really competent people who respect him and he respects them. I mean, I love these people who say, "Oh, these guys are duping Donald Trump." Really? You don't think if he didn't believe Fauci, you don't think he'd be calling him Fathead Fauci right now and talking about how short he is and he wouldn't be able to see over the podium? You know he would be. So you see this executive standing there running something very, very complicated and holding his own, and no one is looking at him like, "Oh, geez, I can't believe I have to be in a room with this guy." It looks like a well-oiled machine, and I think that goes a long way.
Well, Glenn, thanks so much for stopping by. Always great to talk to you. His book, you should check it out right now, is Arguing with Socialists, and the argument, at least for the moment, has been won because Bernie is headed off to eat some pudding at his third lake house. Glenn, really appreciate the time. Good to talk to you.
Great talking to you. Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed that clip from The Ben Shapiro Show. If you did, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you stay up to date on all of our future content.